Okay, we left off on Nun Zainam and Aleph. The Gemara says that Tzipori Mitzora, that if you marry a woman with, let's say, the bird that was slaughtered, Einim Kodeshes. What about the bird, the living bird, before you sent it into the wild? That's part of the ritual to reinstate the Mitzora to be able to come back into the camp. Also, Einim Kodeshes. It's a considered, thank you, it's a considered Yisro Hano. Gufa, Kol Tzipor Torah Tochelu. We quoted the Brisa before. It says regarding the kosher species, it says, all kosher birds you shall eat. So the word kol is superfluous. So the Gemara, the Brisa said before, what does that come to include? The Rabbis is Mshulachas. That when is the bird? When are you not permitted to benefit from the bird? That's before it's sent into the wild. But the bird, after you send it into the wild, although initially you weren't permitted to benefit from it, you're permitted. V'zeh shelo tochelu. And it says, in this you shall not eat, although it goes and delineates all the non-kosher species of birds. What is that referring to? You should not eat. The Rabbah says, that the bird that was slaughtered for the ritual, that retains its forbidden status. Okay? We rule like Rabbi Yochanan, that when does the Tzipor Mitzvah become Osam? No, you're not permitted to benefit, it's only after Shechita. So once you do the Shechita, even after the ritual is done, it retains its forbidden status. So it's a question of one time verdict. Meaning, Kol Tzipor Torah Tochelu, that comes l'Rabbah says Ashchuta. And the living bird, when it says Lo Techelu, that should be the living bird. I mean, why would I say that? The Gemara says earlier that you would think by Kochim, what's the halacha by Kochim? By Kochim, you have a korban. After you slaughter the korban, it's muta b'achila. You're permitted to eat it. So over here, you would think that after you slaughter the bird, it should be muta b'achila. You should be permitted to eat the bird. Yet we're saying to the contrary. The bird that's slaughtered, that's the bird you can't eat. And the bird that you sent into the wild is the bird you could eat. So Mara says, but logically, as we said earlier, since the shechita took place, the shechita should be matir, should permit the bird. And the bird that's sent in the wild, that bird should retain its forbidden status. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon Yechoy, Lo Matzina Bal Chaim Asurim. Where do you find Bal Chaim, living species, which continue to retain their forbidden status? There's no such thing. The Bal Chaim are Asurim. Therefore, it would be logical to say, when it says you should not eat the bird, it's going on the shchuta, on the slaughtered bird, and the bird that's alive that you send into the wild, that's permitted. Because we don't find Bal Chaim Shasurim. No, but we're speaking about means it doesn't retain its forbidden status. We had earlier what Lashar on this goal. Okay, the Gemara is going to ask other questions. The case is, let's say a person committed bestiality with an animal. That's the equivalent of Lashar on this goal. That's the Gemara is going to ask in a moment. Yeah, but it's different. See, there the animal has to be killed. See, here it says a living species that remains alive. The bird, let's say the bird I send into the wild, we'll say is Yisro Hano. That bird, as long as it's alive, it's Yisro Hano. Correct? By the ox that you have to stone, or the animal that you committed bestiality with, what do you have to do with the animal? It has to be killed. So it's not a living, it's not meant to live. This bird is meant to live. So where do we find a living bird which continues to live that retains its forbidden status? Because there's no halacha that you're supposed to do anything with the bird other than send it into the wild, and it's going to retain its forbidden status. That's what the Gemara is saying at this point. But we'll see. If the way I'm explaining it, the Gemara's question is not such a good question. Initially, Maslo Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchok v'lo harei muktzah v'nevad. What about you designate an animal? You know, it's interesting. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, the concept of hegdish, consecration is only Lashem. What about you want to consecrate an animal for Avodah Zarah? Say this animal, I'm designating it should be used for idolatry. It means nothing. The effect is the animal's totally unaffected, but it is affected, but it can't be used as a korban. Something that's designated for Avodah Zarah, it's considered already tainted. It's not appropriate to use it for a korban. If you want to use it for yourself, for your personal use, you can. So, what about a person bows to an animal, worships a living species? You bow to a living species. The halach is it doesn't affect its status. It's only posel korban. The balichaim ninu vasiri and the rosser, meaning they cannot be used as a korban. So you see over here that when it's designated for avodah zarah or one bows to a living animal, they become osur. Although the balichaim, so you see balichaim, living species, they retain the forbidden status. And the Gemara says ki asiri l'kavoa. That if you bow or you designate it for idolatry, that it's osur, it takes on a forbidden status. That's only to be used for a korban, lehejid mishashori, but to be used for your own personal usage. You want to slaughter it for your own personal consumption, it's permitted. So again, so therefore that's not difficult. There the balichaim are mutter. Maskef lo Rav Yirmiyah, but the bird here we're speaking about is Yisro, no, the bird that you're sending into the wild. Maskef lo Rav Yirmiyah, hari roveh v'nirva, okay? Be'edim. What about roveh v'nirva? The halacha is like this. The Gemara says in Tamura, if a person comes and says, somebody committed bestiality to my animal, eid echad. So the halacha is based on the pasuk, the animal cannot be used for a korban, but it could be used for your personal consumption. Because the eid echad normally is not believed. A single witness is not believed. Somebody tells you something is kosher, not kosher, a single witness is believed. But regarding the status of a korban, he's only, regarding these particular areas, it was roveah, somebody committed bestiality, or a woman brought this animal upon herself. So unless they're eidim, you're permitted to benefit from it. It's only, it cannot be used as a korban. But what about roveah v'nira be'edim, the balichaim ninu vasiri? Okay, so the way I explained it, the question is not a question, right? Because roveah v'nira be'edim, although the balichaim, they have to be killed. Right? The question is really not such a good question. The bird that we spoke about sending into the wild is balichaim, that it's going to retain its forbidden status. Rovev and Nirva, if you have witnesses saying somebody committed bestiality with the animal has to be killed. So it's not going to be living, ongoing, forbidden animal, because the animal has to be destroyed. What he meant to say is, it's not logical to say, because the majority of cases of Bali Chaim, we don't find something which has a forbidden status, it lingers on. You find, but the majority of cases not. So if I have a question to apply the psukim to the animal, to the bird that was slaughtered, or to the bird that's alive, it would be more logical to say we apply it to the bird that was slaughtered, that retains its forbidden status, and the living bird that you send into the wild, that itself is permitted. Okay, the very Rabbi Shmuel Tana Domakro. Rabbi Shmuel says it's based on a pasuk. It says in the pasuk regarding the bird, "V'shilach hasatzipor hachayo al pnei asodeh." You should send the living bird on the face of the field, on the surface of the field. Masodeh muteres. Because the question is, it should say you send away the bird. What does it have to say al pnei asodeh? Correct? It seems to be totally superfluous. It's a field, or you send it over a body of water. What difference does it make? Say v'shilach esa tzipor. You send off the bird. What does it have to say? Al pnei asodeh, kisodeh, masodeh, muteres. Just as the field, you're permitted to benefit. The field that you send it in that direction, the field you're permitted to benefit from. Afainami muteres. The bird is similar to the field. Samar says, "Hai sodeh lochi also." Is that what the word sodeh comes to teach us? Now, the word sodeh, it says it has to be sent into the field. It says sodeh shlo yamod b'yafo v'yizrukenu liyam. Yafo is what? Is actually the border between dry land and the sea. So you can't send it, you have to send it from a city outside of the city. You can't send it into the sea. The Geves, v'yizrukenu lamidbar. Geves is the point right before you go into the desert. Let's say the person does this ritual outside the city, and he sends the bird within the city. So Tos has a problem over here. Tos has a problem. Because over here we're talking about, where's the Mitzorah? This ritual of the two birds is to reinstate him that he should be able to go back into the city. So this ritual, where does the Kohen do the ritual? It's chutzlier. It says, he goes, dips the bird, the living bird into the water with the blood, sprinkles on it, then he sends the bird away. But where is he doing this ritual? It's chutzlier. So he's outside the city. But here it says, you should not stand outside of the city and send it within the city. So Tosa says, it's speaking, what you do after you finish the ritual, the Kohen takes the bird into the city, and he sends it out of the city. He's not sending it from the location where he finishes the ritual, because if that's the case, he's outside the city. So now the question is, if you're using the word hasoder, soder to teach me that, how do I know the bird, according to Talmud Rabbi Shmuel, that the bird itself is what? Is mutabad, no, you're permitted. We're saying that the bird is similar to the field. But if we're using the word, the field, for this other halacha, how do we know, how can we equate the bird to the field that it's permitted to benefit from? Idoch, nichtov kro, soder. It says, v'shilach hatzipar apnei hasoder. The field. The hay is superfluous. There's no extra even letter in the Torah. So what's the field? My hasod shma min otarti. So soder teaches me the halacha about you have to be in the city, send out of the city. And the hasod that comes to teach me that the bird has the same status as the field. Just as the field you're permitted to benefit from, the bird you're permitted to benefit from. Rava Omar, Rava says, Lo b'Torah shalach l'takola. Now it is interesting. Now there's halacha, it's not similar. The Mishnah tells us, now we once discussed this in a number of locations, what's the halacha if you have a wool garment and you have a linen thread that that somehow interwove into the wool garment and you can't locate it. You can't locate the linen thread in the wool garment. Are you permitted to sell to a goy? David, you had a question? What this? You're permitted to have enough Shabbos. Wait. Discuss it. What's the halacha? Tosi has a question. It says that pishton that was lost, that couldn't be located in the wool garment, the Jew is not permitted to sell to a non-Jew. Why? Because ultimately, the non-Jew may sell it to a Jew. That's the halacha. So Tosi has a question. In Nido, discuss this in Chulin. Why don't we say bittul barov, right? If you can't locate it, let it be botel. So Tosas answers because it's heter beheter. Because every case of bittul subsuming, you have an entity that's not permitted, and when it intermingles with a permitted entity, the permitted entity subsumes the forbidden entity. But if you have two items, which each one in its own right is permitted, and it's only the combination which creates the forbidden entity, it has no relevance to the concept of bittul. It's always issa v'heter. It's not issa v'heter. So Tosas asks the question, what about basar b'cholav? You have kosher milk, you have kosher meat. Right? So you have two kosher entities, you intermingle them. It says that if you have shishim, if you have 60 to 1, that you're not able to detect the milk, you're permitted to eat the meat. It's heter beheter. That's Tosas' question. Remember what Tosas answers? What? No, but then we're back to square one. So what about the linen thread in the wool garment? It's an entity of shatnez. So why is the entity of shatnez? We don't say now the linen thread is subsumed by the woolen garment. That is what basar b'cholav is. It's the exact same thing. If you have 60 to 1, 60 parts meat versus milk, you're permitted to eat the meat. And the Gemara uses the term bittul. It's botel. And yet, if you have endless times more wool than the linen thread, if you can't locate the thread, it's an entity of combination wool and linen. It's shatnez. Right. Exactly, that is the case. One thread. But why? That's Tosas' quote. Why don't we say bittul barov? Let it. So Tosas says this principle. Bittul only has to do when you're dealing with a forbidden entity permitted, because there has to be a count, right? There has to be a tension between the two of them. But if they're both permitted entities, then we don't apply the principle of bittul. But it's a Mishnah chulin. Tibas cholav, a droplet of milk falls on a piece of meat, and you have 60 versus the milk. You're permitted to eat the meat because it's subsumed. So I'll tell you what Tosas answers. Okay. Okay. So Tosas answers it this way. The Torah says, "Lo sevashu gedi b'chalevimo." You're not permitted to cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's the prohibition of cooking milk and meat. Now, why does a person cook milk and meat? To flavor the meat, or flavor the milk. So the prohibition of basar b'cholov is only when you're able to detect one and the other. But if you're not able to detect it, that is not the prohibition. So he says, when the Gemara says it's bottle, it doesn't mean it's bottle. That because it becomes diluted, therefore the prohibition has no relevance to it. That's not the prohibition of basar b'cholov. Let's say I have basar b'cholov. Let's say I don't have 60. I have less than 60, meat and milk mixed. So now I have an entity of basar b'cholov. Right? Let's say that should intermingle in kosher pieces of meat. Right? And you cook it together. There you would apply the principle of bittul. Because I have a forbidden entity called basar b'cholov intermingling with kosher meat. That's bittul barov. But initially, if the droplet of milk falls on a piece of meat, which is 60 times the droplet, that means that milk never flavored the meat. You're never able to detect it. That's not lo svashuk b'chalivimo. Okay, there's a Tosas and Chulin which we had. There's Tosas Chulin, Tosas Psochim also. We had something similar. And the Shach in Yoredea brings this, cites this. Now, there's a machlokes of Rav and Shmuel. Sato gavar, ilo gavar. Sounds familiar, David? Sato gavar, ilo gavar. What is that? If you have a hot piece of meat on the bottom and you have a cold piece of meat on top, and the top piece of meat touches the bottom piece of meat. So normally we know what causes transfer of taste from one to another. Heat is the catalyst which causes the transfer. You take piece of cheese, cold piece of meat, touch one another. All you have to do is wash off the surface. That's all. They don't absorb from one another. Because for absorption, heat is the catalyst. That's the transfer agent. The transfer agent is heat. So now you have a cold piece of meat and a hot piece of meat. You put the cold piece of meat on top of the hot piece of meat. What's the halacha? The halacha is, okay, that if they're both fatty pieces of meat, we say the bottom piece of meat, we say sato gavar. What's on bottom heats what's on top, and therefore the non-kosher piece on the bottom will be absorbed into the upper piece. So what's the halacha? Let's say you have a case, you have hot milk and you pour hot milk on meat. Hot milk, and you don't have 60 to 1, and it goes hot milk right off the stove, splashes on a piece of meat. How deeply absorbed is that milk in the meat? So if you follow it, and the meat is cold. So if we say sato gavar, we say that the piece of meat cools down the milk instantaneously. But it says, but how long does it take to cool down? It's called the kedei klipa. I mean, it's the thinnest surface that can be shaved off the meat, it'll absorb to that degree. Because when it touched. It has to be cooled. How long does it take to cool? An instant. But that instant, it absorbs the thinnest layer that you're able to shave off the meat. But deeper than that, you're permitted to eat deeper than that. Okay, I mean, la'aloch we rule it's kedei netila. It's the depth of the thumb joint, which is deeper. It's about an inch into the meat. That's all. But the meat below the inch level, you're permitted to eat the meat. But it would be the other way. You'd have a cold piece of meat falling to hot milk, even though the milk has been removed from the fire. The meat is fully absorbed with the hot milk. As cold as that meat is, and ultimately will cool down the milk. But factually, since the bottom, what it fell into was milk, the milk will be fully absorbed into the meat. That's the principle of sato gavar. What's on the bottom overpowers what's on the top. So now we have a shaila. Let's say you have hot piece of meat falling into cold milk. Right? So now we say it takes a moment to cool down. So how much of the milk has become affected by the meat? The surface of the milk. Similar to the surface of the meat, correct? So so if that's the case, let's say I don't have shishim in the milk versus the surface. Are you permitted to drink the milk? You hear the question? A piece of hot meat falls into cold milk. So we say the meat cools down instantaneously, but it takes a moment for it to cool down. So it would be the thinnest surface of the milk. So, but of course that immediately intermingles with the rest of the milk. If I don't have shishim in the milk versus that thinner surface, are you permitted to drink the milk? So Tosa says you're permitted to drink the milk. Why is that? Because derech bishla aser Torah. A person when he cooks something, it's always an entity which remains independent. Since the milk immediately intermingles with the rest of the milk, that's the way a person cooks milk. The meat that we say it absorbs a surface, the surface which can be shaved off, that retains its identity. That surface is flavored with milk. But the milk, with the thinner surface of the milk, immediately intermingles with the rest of the milk. You're never going to locate that milk. As a result of that, that's not called flavored milk. Therefore, it's similar to what we're saying now. That's not the way one cooks milk and meat together. Therefore, the prohibition has no relevance to that. That's Tosis. Okay? So let's talk over here. It says, Rav Ashi says, what's the reason, Rava says, what's the reason why it's logical to say when you send a bird into the wild, it's permitted? Because the Torah doesn't say, Shalach l'takolah. The Torah's not said, if the bird is oseh b'hanor, send it out into the wild. What happens if somebody locates this bird? It's a shirei hanor. Is the Torah going to say, send something into the wild which somebody, a Jew may come upon that bird, and that bird may be what? Be that bird. So he's benefiting from something unknowing to him, which you're not permitted to benefit from. You have the rationale. So it's difficult. I mean, anybody buys a bird, does he have to be concerned? We say, why permitted to drink milk? Because we say the majority of cows are not treifa. They don't have any internal defect. I'd have to worry maybe the milk that I'm drinking came from a cow that does have the defect, because the majority of cows don't have the defect. So if I go and buy a bird in the market or find a bird in the wild, I have to be concerned this bird may be that bird. I have a principle of rov. So if that's the case, what do you mean? Rava says it's a svara. The svara is, the Torah is not going to tell you, say, shalach l'takolah. When you send the bird out, it should be sent out that it should be a pitfall for others. It's not a pitfall. Why is it a pitfall? Even if a person should come on to a non-kosher bird, if he eats it, he's not in violation of anything. Why? Because he has a right to rely on rov. Rov ruled that it's permitted. You have the difficulty. If the Torah says you always have a right to rely on the probability, and probability is that this bird is kosher, even if factually, if you came upon the forbidden bird, it's no different than drinking the milk that's permitted, although it may come from an animal that has a perforated lung or stomach. Yeah. So what's Rava saying? David says something in footnote. But I'm asking from the case of milk. Factually, simultaneously have. What am I? Somebody may find that bird. He's not going to know that bird's the bird. If he knows the bird's not permitted, he knows it's not permitted. So evidently he doesn't know it's not permitted. So good. So he has a right to rely on rov. It's no different than anything else that you rely on rov. Something that you can't verify, you rely on rov. It's not a stumbling block. It's not a stumbling block. No. Stumbling block is I cause somebody to do an isser, to be in violation of something. If the person who finds it relies on rov, I did not cause him to do it. He didn't do an isser. A nazir knows he's not permitted to drink wine. So if I offer wine to the nazir who's not permitted to drink wine, I put a stumbling block before the nazir. Somebody wants to eat non-kosher, and I offer him the non-kosher. So why is he eating non-kosher? Because I offer him, he knows he's eating non-kosher. That's l'ftivi l'siti and michshol. Here, the one who's eating is going to benefit from the bird. He's relying on rov. Okay, but factually, this case is no different than the case of the woolen garment, that you lose the linen thread. You're not permitted to sell the linen garment to a non-Jew, because that non-Jew may sell it to a Jew. What do you mean? But the Jew buys it. He doesn't know that linen thread was lost in the garment. Let's go after the majority. The vast majority of woolen garments, if you check it and you can't locate the Shabbos, the presumption is it doesn't contain linen. But it's the same thing. Why aren't you permitted to sell it to the non-Jew? Because there's a concern he may sell it to the Jew, but the vast majority of woolen garments, after they've been checked, if you can't locate the shatnez, the probability is they don't contain linen. But yet the halacha is you're not permitted. So it's the same rationale as the Gemara says here. You can't put something into the public arena, although the buyer has a right to rely on rove. You don't do this. Now, we had a machlokas, very interesting machlokas. There's a principle, Ein vadel nis l'chatchila. Let's say you have 59 guests. You have 60 guests. And you have 61 guests. And you only have 60 portions of kosher food. So you go to the MP, buy yourself another piece of meat not kosher, and you go, you intermingle it, and the cut of meat looks exactly like the kosher cut. Are you permitted to? See, and once you mix them, you cannot identify the original cut that you put in there. So Gemara says, Ein vadel nis l'chatchila. You're not permitted to assume something intentionally. If you do, rabbinically, we penalize you. Now, is that an Issa d'oraisa? This is Rabbanan. It's a machlok shishonim. The Ravid, the Ran in Chulin cites a Ravid. It's an Issa d'oraisa. Although if you did it, you're permitted to benefit and eat it, and the penalty is only rabbinical, but to mix it is an Issa d'oraisa. That's the Ravid. Shitas HaRavid. It's based on the pasuk. It's not a negative commandment. You did the wrong thing. The Torah doesn't want you to do such things. I'll explain it in one of two ways. The other Rishonim says rabbinical. Why? Because if you allow a person to start mingling with ratios, what would be if when he intermingles it, the ratio is not a proper ratio? It's not sufficient. So ultimately, a person is going to get caught up in a way where he's actually be in violation because the ratio is not going to be sufficient to subsume the minority. Therefore, rabbinically, we create a fence. We don't want you to do it. That's the way the vast majority of Rishonim learn. The Ravid is a single opinion, says no, it's an Issa d'oraisa. But you could learn the Issa d'oraisa is similar to this. It's because of a fence. Sometimes you find on Torah that the defenses. Torah doesn't want you to tamper and mingle and with this kind of thing, with ratios, because what would be if the ratio is not a proper ratio? So ultimately you're going to be eating non-kosher or benefiting from non-kosher. Therefore, the Torah doesn't want you to tamper with it. So if you hold it, your opinion in Issa d'oraisa, it will be similar here. Even though when I send it into the wild, the person who finds it has a right to rely on rove, but me to create a situation that you have no right to create that situation. So that's similar to Ein vadel nis l'chatchila. How do you drink milk? The one who's selling the milk, he himself doesn't know the animal's a treifa, correct? He doesn't know it's a treifa. He himself is relying on rove. Why, when he milks that animal, why does he sell it as kosher milk? That's something which is not possible to know. Here, initially, you know it's not permitted, and you say, well, he'll rely on rove. But you see, that we don't do that. Because you see that from the Issa d'oraisa of Ein vadel nis l'chatchila. You're not permitted to subsume something intentionally. To be continued.